Okay, this is my new Mun landing rocket. It has a little bit of a different design than what I would usually have. It's got 3 tri-stacks around a central tri-engine, which is kind of weird. If there was a quad coupler, then I could put 4 engines in the middle and have it balanced, but for some reason there isn't one of those in stock parts, so this does it. It's got some little issues that make it fairly difficult to get into orbit, but it's perfectly possible. Okay, this is a good liftoff. It feeds. The reason why there's SAS pods in the middle, I don't usually use SAS, but those are only there because otherwise those fuel tanks on the top, the single ones, those are supposed to feed into the central tank for the central tri-engines that have the vector thrusters on them. If I didn't put those there, then those feed into the engines below it, which is kind of weird. You should be able to like check something to make it so that the tri-couplers don't always transfer fuel, but I'm pretty sure you can't, so I just put those on mainly for that. But I guess they help a little bit with spinning, but that's not that big of a problem. There are some steering issues though, because this is such a large rocket, which you'll see as I try to get into orbit in a little bit. See, I'm already having a little bit of trouble here. There's a little bit of spin, and it's just really wide, so it's hard to lead it to the correct angle. It's not that tall. But as you can see, there's a whole bunch of fuel tanks on it. This is designed mainly to have a lot of fuel to spare, so you can make tremendous mistakes and still make it to the Mun and back. Like, one time I accidentally, I tried to do an orbit of the moon, and I got into a really eccentric orbit and ended up getting pulled out of orbit with the moon and ended up going in a humongous Kerbin orbit. Like, it was gigantic, like 1,000,000 kilometers out, and I still managed to go to retro and get back to the Mun, land, and then make it back. So there's plenty of fuel to do pretty much anything, which I kind of demonstrate in the video later. I'm getting pretty high. I'm starting to slowly try to tilt into my orbit, but I'm having a little bit of trouble controlling it. Just because that's part of the problem. It has a lot of power behind it, but the power makes it really hard to steer. And it's 3 vector thrusters against 12 non-vectoring thrusters, so there's a little bit of difficulty there. I think I'm getting ready to jettison this first stage. Still slowly tilting. You'll see what I mean by it's kind of difficult to control. So it's not like my other moon rocket in that it doesn't, it's not really easy to get into orbit. That's the main problem on this. Once you're in orbit, you're good, and once you jettison the first stage, you're good. But before that, you've got some problems. So sometimes you have to abort orbit because you can't get into orbit. Or you get into an extremely eccentric orbit, which this is a pretty eccentric orbit, but this is about the best I've been able to do, at least using the keyboard. Maybe if I could get my joystick to work or something, I could fly a little bit better, but sadly that is not an option because of certain issues with my joysticks right now. Anyway, going about horizontal now, on very high thrust, so we're rapidly accelerating. Almost ready to jettison that stage. I think we're feeding off the central tanks almost. See, it runs out, even though the tanks aren't all hooked up, it still runs off those 4 side tanks into the thing, so it actually has, it actually has 8 tanks that feed into the central 4 that run these last 3 thrusters here. And those jettison with the rest of them, even though they're not linked up. But they actually run out of fuel at almost the exact same time. It's kind of cool. Anyway, as you can see, I'm going to be in a very eccentric orbit. The second stage is actually kind of hard to steer because it's kind of wobbly because of the way it's designed. It's very front heavy. because it's got 6 fuel tanks just on the lander itself, which helps with, that's why I can do pretty much whatever I want, because I have so much fuel. And if you haven't noticed, the fuel tanks are actually fixed directly to the lander, so they will not jettison until I'm all the way back at Kerbin, jettisoning the module. I'm just trying to get a better altitude here. Very eccentric orbit, but it's not that bad. I mean, it doesn't matter that much in the end, because I have a lot of spare fuel, so I could have just sat there burning for like a long time. No problem. Anyway, I've still got 2 tanks of fuel feeding into these 3 vector thrusters, so I'll use those to get to the moon. Even though I could easily use just the lander rockets to get all the way to the moon and back, because my other lander from the video, it only has 5 tanks of fuel. This one has 7, but the 5 tanks is enough to fly all the way there, land, and come all the way back. But this is a similar configuration to that. All the 6 outer tanks feed into the inner tanks. They just don't jettison at all. As the lateral decouplers actually weigh more than the empty fuel tanks do if you look at it. So I figured, why not just not have them? It'll just improve stability and keep the thing straight. The Mun's gravity is not enough to actually make jettisoning any of the fuel tanks that important. Okay, now I'm getting ready to shoot for the moon. I don't have any RCS on this thing, so flipping it over and getting ready to go is fairly difficult. There we go. Now we are just going to burn all the way out there. We have plenty of fuel. Very good time. We had such an eccentric orbit that we don't really need to burn nearly as long, which is fine. I mean, it literally is lined up to pretty much the right place already, so wasting the fuel early on just meant I don't have to waste as much fuel getting there. Anyway, this was actually not the best orbit, because my time I landed before this, I had way more fuel in my second stage than I do on this go. So I must have made a mistake getting into orbit, which it wasn't. It was a pretty sloppy orbit, but either way, I still have plenty of fuel, so it doesn't matter that much. Anyway, we've still got a little sliver of fuel. I really should have jettisoned the fuel tank here, because once we get to the moon, I tried to do a retro burn anyway with that little bit of fuel to not waste it, and it lasts about 1 second. And it probably would have wasted less time if I just dropped it. Okay. I was actually worried for a second that I might miss the moon, but I get there. We don't get caught by it till we're past the apoapsis a little bit, but we still go in just fine, so it doesn't matter. It's actually close to being an intercept where we could have not retroed at all and still landed on the moon, but it wasn't quite there. Okay, now I'm just waiting till I get a little bit closer, because I want to get a nice orbit around the moon before trying to land. So I'm just waiting until I'm closer to the periapsis before doing that. And now I'm going to do the retro using my second stage, even though I really might as well have just dropped it, because it's not going to do anything. So this is kind of a waste of time here. For some reason I thought the fuel would last longer because I'm used to only having one engine down there or having a big stack of fuel there. But that is not on this design. I've only flown to the moon a couple times with this rocket. Let's see, watch fire. And that's it. So kind of a waste, but I can jettison that, and then I still have a whopping 7 tanks of fuel to land with and then get back. So it's a little bit heavy to land, but I do a lot of maneuvering here just to show just how much fuel I have, and I'm gonna maneuver all the way over to the other side of the moon and land in a crater down at the bottom, and then my way I get back is just brute force because I'm trying to show just how much fuel this thing can expend to get you wherever you want to go. I actually just accidentally pulled myself into the surface, so I'm on a collision course right now, which I didn't want. So I'm going to try to expand the orbit. But I decide that I shouldn't do that by accelerating. Instead, I'm going to slow the thing all the way down to where it's not moving, and then I'm going to insert myself into another orbit just using fuel. This is a tremendous waste of fuel, but this thing has the fuel to spare. I mean, I could make it to the moon just fine with my other one, with just enough fuel. But if I have this much fuel to spare, then what's the point in not using all of it? This is a very long retro burn. We're almost completely accelerated to where we are basically not going to be moving. I mean, we're still going to be moving because the moon's going to draw us in, but then I'm going to line it up and basically start another orbit from standstill right here, which usually you wouldn't be able to do because you wouldn't have enough fuel, but this thing is designed, like I said, specifically to have a whole bunch of fuel. So I just decided to just play around with it all I want. Which, before I had trouble getting it off the surface, because usually if you have a lot of fuel, then you have to have a lot more fuel to get it out of the atmosphere of Kerbin and into orbit, but I didn't run into that. The way I designed the rocket, it actually does that just fine. It has a lot of horsepower getting this thing up. And I saved weight wherever I could, like not using the lateral decouplers at all. But I mean, that's almost a negligible weight, I don't know. But it also doesn't have RCS at all, but, you know. There, now I'm lined up to basically go into orbit, and I'm just going to burn into a straight orbit again. Going over the top. So I'm trying to land on a crater on the other side, and for some reason I thought this would be the best way to achieve that. If I have so much fuel, what's the point in going any other way? There's definitely better orbital insertions than this though, so if you have the fuel to spare, you might as well use it, but if you don't, you're gonna have to be a lot more precise than this. Anyway, there we go. I'm now in an orbit going over the top. I still have so much fuel. Look at that. I've used about a quarter of my tanks. And then I've still got the central tank, which is all you really need to get home for anything. Anyway, now you can see the crater I'm trying to land in. The orbital line goes right over the crater, which sometimes you don't recommend landing on the dark side because you can't see the shadows, so it's difficult to judge just how high you are because the altitude doesn't actually it doesn't actually show your distance from the ground, it just shows your distance from like sea level on the moon. So if there's a mountain or a hill below you, you'll end up hitting it before your altitude actually reaches 0. But if you look at the textures and kind of figure out the hills around you as you're coming down, it's not that difficult to land on the dark side. Just be really careful and come down really slow, especially when you're below 1,000 meters. Okay, now I'm trying to figure out just which direction that is, because I'm a little bit disoriented right now. Either way. There we go. Now we have to transition over a little bit, otherwise we're not going to end up going into the crater there. So that's why, if you look at the virtual horizon, the I can't remember what that's actually called, but I'm just going to call it the virtual horizon. That's why I'm a little bit off of the X. Still plenty of fuel. That's like, if you look at the fuel, it doesn't even look like it's going down. I have so much. There we go. Now the thing has turned, so it's now putting me down right towards the center of the crater. I'll be coming almost straight down once I get to the edge of that, so I'm not even going to bother with a retro burn until I'm pretty close, because I'm going pretty slow right now. At least I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm not entirely sure. I think I'm going to get to around 10,000 before retroing at all, because you don't want to go too low, though, otherwise you're going to have problems. Never mind, I guess I'm going to do it up at 25. 10,000, yeah, that would have probably been too high. If you're at 10,000, you're still going like 400 meters per second, you're probably going to crash. So you're going to want to make sure that you burn enough that... Okay. Oh, we're almost to 10,000. That's when it's critical that you're not going too fast. So I'm going to go into full burn here again. Especially with all this fuel, I weigh a lot more than a traditional lander is going to, because I have... These are almost half tanks, so I've got like 3 full extra tanks of fuel. Just in fuel weight, and I've got the tanks themselves and the central tanks. This thing weighs quite a bit. You know, but... Yeah, as long as you go slow enough, it doesn't matter. I also don't have RCS. I don't usually put RCS on my landers because it's just added weight, and you have to make it taller then, which means that your odds of tipping over or knocking off one of the fins or something is higher. I mean, some of them have RCS, but honestly, it's really difficult because there's like no good view that I see to actually use the RCS. I just screwed up a little bit and almost lost control, but like if you want to transition one way or another, like there's no view that lines up on the correct side of the thing, so it's really confusing when you're transitioning around, if that makes any sense. Like the orientation of the view, if there was like a first person view, even if you were facing straight up, that would make it a lot easier to pilot. Or straight down, or whatever, and make it a lot easier to use RCS to transition. But otherwise, if I can't pilot effectively using it, then I don't see any point to actually use it. Especially because as long as I line it up right, I can land just fine. Like, I'm coming in on a slight gradient, but it's not very much at all. So now I'm watching the texture. I don't know if this might be a 720p, I'm not sure, but I don't know if you can tell in the video, but you can see the ground slowly change. This might be my graphics options too, but it goes to like a higher res texture as you get closer and closer, and that's how I'm judging my altitude relative to the hills and stuff. And then once I get really close, I kind of freak out because I see the hills passing me, and I didn't realize I was quite that low, so I'm going to do a pretty heavy burn once I get really low. But I'm keeping it in like the 15 meters per second or something all the way down once I'm below 1,000 meters, because I don't want to get too close. See, I can kind of see how the landscape is changing on the way down. I've still got a lot of fuel. It's gonna keep burning. I'm at about 300 meters. Now I can definitely start to see the differences between shadows and stuff. It's pretty obvious right here where I am. I slid a little bit, but it's not dangerous enough to actually have to abort. Just make sure you disable your SAS, otherwise your fins try to move around and might knock you off balance. The fin thing with the SAS is kind of stupid. I don't like how much the fins move because it makes it a lot more... I wish you could disable the fins with the advanced SAS, because I don't need the fins even in the atmosphere. They're just there for landing because there's no stock landing part. But like, that's why I kept disabling it during the launch. And my other rocket is a lot worse because the fins aren't fixed directly to fuel tanks that are fixed to the center. They like create this crazy yaw motion that puts a whole bunch of stress on the frame and can actually rip the rocket to pieces. Because the advanced SAS is so brute force, it doesn't like change anything out. So like it doesn't just change in like little increments. It just like goes all on or all off. So it's like just forcing it back and forth. Like there's no delta at all. Anyway, I'm gonna get back in probably like the most primitive brute force way possible. I'm on the other side, so rather than throwing it into an orbit, I'm just gonna take off until I can see the Earth and then just shoot straight at it. Because I have so much fuel. Once again, why does it matter? If I could get a lander this large to the moon, I can definitely get lighter moon landers than even the one in the video before this. I'm not quite sure about the designs though, but a lot of the designs I see to do this have really, really big rockets, and it almost seems like the rockets give you diminishing returns. Like, if you have a really big rocket, then you need more big rockets to hold up all the fuel and stuff, and it just doesn't seem like having a humongous rocket is that good. But it's all like efficiency, and it depends on how big your lander is. Like, this is a pretty big lander, but I got rid of those decoupling struts, so that actually saved quite a bit of weight, I think. At least like 1 or 2. I mean, it wasn't that much, but every little bit helps. Plus, I got off the Mun just fine without wasting any fuel, so what's the point in jettisoning those? Especially if I have 6 tanks. I know I would not use all the fuel on 6 tanks to get here, no matter what I did. So what's the point even decoupling it all? Like my other lander with the 4 tanks, in that video I fly all the way back to Kerbin with the 4 tanks and don't jettison them until I get like within range. So, you know. Anyway, now I'm actually going to retro right here and stop again, and then I'm just going to go straight to the Kerbin. This is a dramatic waste of fuel, but it doesn't matter because I have so much. I've still got at least maybe a third, maybe a fourth tank in each of the 6 tanks, and I've still got the central tank that hasn't been used at all, and you only need 1 tank to get back, if you line it up right. So I basically got more than like 2 or 3 tanks left if you combine them all. Okay, now I'm just aiming straight at Kerbin, and I'm just gonna go straight back. Let's throw a raw, humongous burn. Like seriously, I know that early on you're gonna have trouble with fuel if you're like just attempting this, and even like on my not stock ships, I had trouble with fuel early on, but this thing has a lot of fuel and has absolutely no problem getting here and maneuvering a lot and getting all the way back. But the key definitely seems to be these laterally mounted fuel tanks, because if I had 7 tanks on a lander where they're mounted one on top of the other, I would never be able to land. It would tip over. I mean, it certainly is possible to land, but, you know, the update where they let you laterally mount fuel tanks definitely made it a lot easier. So usually you'd only be able to fit 2 or 3, and getting all the way there on 2 or 3 and back is kind of hard. You have to have stages carry you there and then use the least amount of fuel possible to land, and you know, 3 is usually good in 3 lateral and 1 middle is usually good enough for a traditional design. I like to use 4 just because then you've got a little bit of leeway in case you have to make some corrections, but this was just a test to see if I could really use 6, and it worked just fine. Anyway, now I actually tried to insert myself into an orbit, but I screwed up just a little bit and end up getting into a pretty bad orbit. I mean, I can get into an orbit, but I try to get into a really close orbit, and I don't quite do it. Since that's where you're going to waste a lot of fuel, too. So right now, I freaked out because I thought I was about to run out of fuel, but then I realized I have another whole tank, so what's the point? Anyway, now I'm on that central tank again. I have plenty of fuel to get back still. It's where if you have like 1 tank and you're on the moon, you can still get all the way back using just 1 tank. Okay, no, I accidentally burned too long. I was actually trying to put it so that the periapsis is really close to the Earth, and then retro from there, so then I could bring the other side of the orbit in and get in a low orbit over the Earth, but I failed. So now I'm just going to retro off the rest of my fuel, because this is a really violent re-entry at this angle, very fast, skipping like through the atmosphere, so you'll see how violent it is when it comes in. The thing just starts spinning like crazy and I can't stop it, and we hit 15 Gs. Which 15 Gs, you can survive. People have survived 15 Gs, so I don't think you necessarily die from that instantly. Someone said that in my last video. I mean, if they were exposed to it for like 3 minutes or something, but they only get exposed to it for like 10 seconds. That one guy survived like 30 Gs for like a minute. But 15's really high. They'd probably black out, but, you know, I don't think you die from that. Especially not if it's not for very long. But real astronauts certainly are not exposed to 15 Gs on re-entry, so you should not re-enter at this speed. But I don't have enough fuel to do a long enough retro. I'm coming down inside. I wanted to get in an orbit so that I could come down closer to the landing pad, but I screwed that up and I didn't have enough fuel to fix it. honestly trying to get it to stop spinning, but it just keeps spinning. I can't. Usually the SAS keeps it from doing that, but I think it's the angle that I'm coming in. I turned off the SAS to try to get it steady, and then turned it on, and I just can't get it to stop spinning, but it doesn't really matter that much. They're going to be getting awfully dizzy, and I'm sure they'd be getting pretty high G-forces if they were spinning that fast, but I'm not quite sure why that happened, but it's probably the angle. But even once the chute goes up, it's still trying to spin a little bit. Jeez. Anyway, very violent re-entry, usually. This is one of the few times when my re-entry is more violent than my orbit. Anyway, that's pretty much it.